Everywhere is sound. The cars, the planes, everybody's making noise. And can you hear God? Can you shut up and hear God? Father Thomas Keating, thank you very much for coming and being on our program. God bless you for your life. One of the things that we try to do in the program is make sure that the people we talk with are relatable, that somehow that we can say, oh my gosh, look at this man. He's wearing this vestment that's different. He's a monk. He's been giving his life to God. I could never get anywhere close to that. Could you give us a little bit of insight about how did this all get started, and were there some struggles in the beginning before your experience of Christ that really moved you to this call? Is that enough to ask you?
Well, how many volumes are you interested in? Well, very briefly, I received a deep conversion when I was a first-year student at Yale University.
What were you studying at Yale? What was your
Well, I
interest?
was just a freshman.
Okay.
I didn't have any specialization at the time. But I did have a course in contemporary philosophy.
Okay.
And there, you know, people like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Tolstoy and Hume and all those
Started stirring your mind. And
it did raise some questions.
Yes,
I
yes,
had
yes.
been raised as a Catholic, but not too well educated as such.
so your background in Catholicism wasn't too much. Well, what about at home? What was your experience at home with regard to being a Catholic?
Well, my father was a very honest and a great man, but he was not religiously inclined in regard to an institution, and he had been to a Catholic college where he had to go to Mass every day.
Ooh,
And that
so many times that turns off people, huh?
Well, he figured he became a lawyer, and according with his legal mind, he figured he had been to enough masses during the week to last for the rest of his life. And so, as a professional person, he preferred to play golf on a Sunday.
Okay.
So he left it to my mother, who was not a Catholic, to look to our religious education.
What kind of, was she a Christian?
She was what might be called a gospel Christian.
Ah, interesting.
And also a very wonderful lady. But there was not a religious atmosphere in the home. We did not say grace at meals. And he was somewhat negative about the Roman Catholic Church. He had a few unfortunate experiences. But so he wanted me to be a lawyer, and he was, I think, disappointed that I was not attracted. My grandfather had started this firm, and he had entered it, and actually my younger brother became a lawyer too. So I'm somewhat exposed to the legal mind.
How many brothers and sisters did you have? What's the?
We have 4 in the family.
4. Okay.
But anyway, all this came to a head,
Yes.
and I was challenged to leave the church there when I was just 17 and a freshman at Yale. But I was struggling.
But with the philosophers, they were kind of
Well, they raised
too many questions.
significant questions, whether you want to call them good or bad or indifferent. They were serious, and
Yes.
so I figured I have to solve this, and my life, my eternal salvation
Amen.
is at stake. So I started reading the Fathers of the Church.
For example, what does that mean, Fathers of the Church?
Well, I came across in the Yale Library a book by St. Thomas Aquinas that it was a collage of the sayings of a large number of those fathers on each sentence of Scripture, line by line.
Wow.
So this was really a turning point in my life, and I don't think it's ever turned any other way, and that was that the Christian religion is a contemplative religion at its very core, that the heart of it is is to communicate the experience that Jesus had of the Father as Abba, that is, the loving God, and that this was a normal state of a Christian, was to be transformed through contemplative prayer and life into another Christ. So that became my ideal, so much so that I neglected my studies and read all these books. And I got into the mystics, and I read St. Teresa and St. John of the Cross and the medieval mystics. And I went to church all the time, and I hung out with the old ladies that used to circulate the side chapels and honor St. Jude and St. Joseph. And I didn't know what else to do.
This is all new. I mean, you had not done this before. So.
No, this was all new. So I just figured I just had an inescapable attraction to develop prayer, but no one was there to tell me how to do this or how to pray. So I went to benediction ad infinitum and Mass every day, several Masses sometimes, and so I didn't have much time for my studies. But fortunately, I had enough intelligence or gray matter to be able to get D's, so I didn't.
So you got through.
You got thrown out.
You got through.
But
so this was your what part?
Well, that was my beginning, and then I went from there to look for a contemplative order, because in those days it was felt if you want to be a contemplative, you had to join an order or lead a very austere life or live in a cave or something. So nobody knew anything about contemplation in those days. Priests had not heard about it in their seminary training, and I don't know whether they do yet. So I wasn't interested in the diocesan clergy for that reason, because I didn't see any contemplative dimension to their lifestyle. So I finally found the Trappists, after looked around for the most austere order I could find, and I think I succeeded for a time.
Well, it kind of stuck, huh?
Well, yeah, I only talked to 2 people for about 5 or 6 years, apart from a little instruction on how to do the work. So it was a severe life. We got up at 2 o'clock.
But no,
things like that.
You went to Yale, but you also went to Fordham. Huh?
Well, after 2 years at Yale, the war started and the class accelerated, and I had a commitment to work at a Dominican camp for underprivileged children, and so I felt that was a bigger obligation, and I expected to be drafted anyway. In those days, I was close to being a pacifist because of my reading of the Fathers, and so I think the early Christians tended to be more contrary to war than succeeding generations. In any case, I then discovered the Trappists. The director of this camp thought it would be a treat to take his counselors to this monastery, an odd way to entertain the ordinary young people. But when I went into this, we arrived there late at night. It was time for Compline, the last prayer of the day. And when we went into the doors and they closed behind us, one of the other boys said, "How would you like to be locked in here forever?" Well, actually, I thought this would be a great idea.
I love it. Well,
so we tiptoed into the sanctuary, into the guest chapel, and the priest who was leading us said, "Well, you know, the monks are always praying to God, and so be very quiet. I don't want to disturb them." Well, that stuck in my mind, because that's what I wanted to do. I always wanted to be in conversation or in the presence of God. And so I really developed a kind of romance with this monastery, or what it stood for, because I used to go there surreptitiously, because my family or my parents would have been very against it if they'd known.
This is really going against the grain.
Remember, I'm still underage.
Yeah, this is going against the grain of the whole spirit of your family, huh?
Yeah, well, all my friends and all the things I'd been doing, I gave up not just the movies, but the drinking, smoking, the opera, sports, everything. I just wanted to, well, I was trying to be a monk in the world, in the strict sense of the word, instead of a contemplative in the world. So it took me about 20 or 30 years to make this distinction. Contemplative prayer is not about austerity. It's about giving oneself completely to God and living in the presence of God. And it's not something special as a lifestyle. It's a life that's designed for every Christian, and it's the normal Christian life. And that it's accessible to everyone since God dwells within us, as Paul says. Don't you know, you're the temple of God and the Spirit dwells within you. So I really took this seriously. So I used to spend hours before the Blessed Sacrament. And then I entered the monastery and bought into this very austere life. And it nearly killed me. I expected to die young, but here I am at 83, about to come 84. So what you expect in the spiritual journey never happens, and what you don't expect usually does.
Wow.
And so...
tell me a little bit, if you could, just a little bit more about this transformation. It sounds like it's so kind of otherworldly, if you will. I mean, from going in one direction with your family of the law and kind of an irreligious experience in the family to the depth of this. What was going on?
Well, have you ever heard of God?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
I didn't do this. This was what happened to me. And I was able to say yes most of the time.
But you said yes. You said yes to something.
Well, I tried to.
As best you could.
You can always do better. And so...
do you think
then I bought into monastic life at a time when it was extremely strict and influenced, at least the Trappists, by a French militaristic mentality coming from the French Revolution, when this particular reform of the Benedictine or Cistercian life came into being. So it emphasized penance rather than the contemplative dimension that was characteristic of the Cistercians of the 12th and 13th century with St. Bernard and...
Okay.
So the order too had lost. I mean, we have to face the fact that the Christian churches have been in something of a spiritual desert for several hundred years, and so they forgot about the contemplative tradition, and you couldn't find the writings of the fathers in English. They were only in Latin.
Really?
And even the monastic fathers, we didn't know. We'd only get them in a few of them. So all of that renewal of the contemplative dimension started in monasteries in the early 60s, and the Cistercian publications began to publish the books of our order. So the whole tone of the order shifted after the Second Vatican Council, became more balanced and a little more humane.
In terms of
still strict, but not emphasizing penance for penance's sake, so to speak.
Let me ask you this: as you speak of this world of contemplation, and sometimes we're distant from it, the Reformation, in many ways, moved away from the whole concept of meditation and monks moving away to prayer and saying, we need to be present in the world, and so let's get married and let's live the life that we're living in, and that's where spirituality can be found. For example, if I'm talking to an evangelical, your style of life is kind of, whoa, that's kind of really out of the whole strain of what an evangelical Protestant would think about. How do you respond to that in terms of the importance of it in the midst of their saying, no, get rid of that, let's get everybody together in the
Well, I would say that friends, we're in the same ballpark, we just work for a different team. Everybody, in my view, the contemplative dimension of the gospel is the principle of unity among all Christians, among all the denominations. And if more people in those denominations practiced contemplative prayer, that unity would begin to appear. Because we see this in the retreats that we give, which are very ecumenical. When people sit and be silent together, they find each other at a different level, and doctrinal differences still have their importance, but they don't have the emotional defensiveness or aggressiveness that has sometimes characterized the relations between the different churches. God is interested in saving everybody, according to Paul. He wills all people to be saved. So it's bringing, I think the call of our time, and maybe I'm mistaken, is for the religions of the world to stop fighting each other. This is a scandal, or to undermine each other's efforts in one way or another. It's not conversion that is most important in our time, but developing or creating communion between the denominations and the world religions. And the contemplative dimension of the gospel is the principle of unity, as we've experienced it in groups that devote themselves to centering prayer, which is a path to contemplation. So I think the future of the world depends on people becoming aware of this dimension and practicing it, and realizing that the divine presence is supporting us all, and that different world religions have, as Vatican II documents state, have certain saving elements in their rituals. Document doesn't say how or how much. But if that's true, then we owe all the religions a certain respect, because some saving help of Christ is present in them, whether they're aware of it or not. And the violence between world religions has to stop. Otherwise, you can't expect the nations of the world to start practicing heroic charity and forgiveness and all the other things that world peace will require.
One of the things that I've found a real challenge in trying to get acceptable this whole world of meditation, this whole world of contemplation, is perhaps the difficulty of you being a monk and the distinction that somehow you as a monk are holier than everybody else. And so everything that you say, you know, you're a monk, you're doing this, and it's like, whoa, but here I am, you know, I've got a husband, I've got a wife, I've got 5 kids, I've got to run off to soccer, and I've got to, you know, do all these things and work extra hard. You know, oh, you know, it's okay for you to be in the monastery and away from that. And so the division between the possibility of contemplation becoming a reality sometimes is difficult for us to grasp. Could you respond to that?
By all means, forget it. It's just an illusion. Do you think we don't work in a monastery? We don't have to earn a living? We don't have personnel problems? You don't have superiors you don't like, or brethren you can't get along with?
Really? That happens in a monastery?
That happens any place on this earth, as far as I know. And contemplation doesn't heal all your difficulties. It only makes them known to you, so you can work on them if you want to, with the help of God's grace.
Well, I remember Christ coming one time, and the apostles were in back of him, and he was walking, and then they came into Capharnaum, and they came into a building, and he said, "What were you talking about?" And it's kind of, and they got all nervous, and they said, "Well, we were talking about who was the greatest." And you know, I think that's a real problem with Christianity. We start putting people on pedestals, and we start saying, well, I could never do that because you're living your lifestyle and that's so different than mine. What I really think is that Jesus is calling us all to a real sense of equality, and we've got to be careful.
That's very good. No,
Isn't
I
it true?
agree with you
know
more.
I mean, and that we're
That's good insight.
that we're really pulling people of all levels into a real understanding. Yes, you know, contemplation is yours. You don't have to be a monk to be holy. And one of my greatest complaints of the Catholic Church is, well, not greatest, but if you look at the Catholic Church, 99.9% of all canonized saints are either celibate or martyrs. And the problem is that 99.9% of all Catholics are neither.
Yes.
And until we start to see the sanctity in a much, much broader way, that your gift is not just a monastic thing, but it's a beautiful gift for everyone
Well,
in the
right
church.
now I'm a lousy monk from every point of view, because I'm not home very much.
I gotta write that down here.
I felt moved, and I hope it's the gift of the Holy Spirit, to share the essence of monastic contemplative prayer
With everyone.
with everybody.
Amen.
And
Amen.
my observation is that people living ordinary lives are not only just as good, but probably better at contemplation.
Amen.
Because
No, better. Tell me about that. What do you mean?
well, the great work of contemplative prayer is not consolation of a spiritual kind, but the revelation of our unconscious motivation, or the shadow side of our personality that is killing other people and ourselves. And so meditation or contemplation is only half of the job, so to speak broadly. You also have to work on yourself. What the early monks called the active life was not an apostolic life, but working on your own vices as these became known in the silence of prayer, where you saw how the trauma of early life influenced your attitudes and reactions to people.
And God.
God. Yeah. And so the redemption is a pervasive healing of every level of human nature, including our emotional life. And so this is why everybody needs this, because for some reason silence makes us vulnerable to the unconscious. And the unconscious has in it all these gifts of God that we received with grace and baptism that we haven't learned how to use. And on the other hand, the unconscious negative attitudes and vices and attitudes that prevent us from loving other people until we face that dark side of our personality and ask Jesus to heal us. You can't fix yourself, or anybody else for that matter, but you can be willing that grace will heal you, and you're usually not willing if you don't even know you have these faults. Yeah. So contemplative prayer reveals little by little, with the greatest consideration and psychological skill, the divine intelligence is superb, it's incomparable. And gradually, through circumstances of life, and sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes you recycle the same faults at deeper levels, until finally you become absolutely naked, so to speak, in the spiritual sense of the word, and you realize that what God loves most about us is our spiritual poverty, not our virtues. He doesn't need those, but he does need our desperate.
Say that again. Could you put it another way? That's interesting. He loves our
spiritual poverty or destitution, in other words, our helplessness.
Yeah, but isn't it better if
Look
I do all those holy things?
Don't listen to me. Look at what Paul says. When he came down from his ecstasies, remember he had this thorn in the flesh that God gave him to prevent him from getting elated, which is a real hazard even for contemplatives. So in order to forestall that, notice this is not a prayer, but this is circumstance, some affliction. Maybe it was malaria, maybe it was some, I don't know what it was, he doesn't say. But anyway, he prayed 3 times, which is a sign of desperation, to be delivered, and God answered him, "My grace is enough for you. For grace, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Okay, so powerlessness is the source of strength in the Christian contemplative journey, which is why Jesus had such a hard time with those disciples who wanted to be the greatest. They were heading in the wrong direction at top speed.
Power.
That's what God loves. That's what divine mercy reaches out to, or goodness wants to enrich. He's got all the angels if he wants the, some high-polished behavior. But for somebody to love looks for need, or mercy reaches out to those most in need. And so once you know your own needs, you can't judge other people, so that fighting somebody else makes no sense, because it's like hitting yourself in the nose. But this sense of our personal oneness with the rest of humanity has never been understood, although it's preached in Christianity and the other religions.
Listen, we're gonna take a break. If we could, you're speaking of the word, I think just the simple word of silence, which is a rather frightening sound in our own world. But I'd like, if we may, to maybe get a little flavor of what that silence means with your contemplative prayer as we come back. We're going to be
Okay.
coming right back. Please listen to this message, and we'll be right back with you. Father Keating, thank you very much for being with us and opening up to us the challenge of coming closer to God in our life with our prayer. I think maybe it's fitting as we conclude this program that we just do enter into prayer, even though it might not be a quiet prayer that we're talking about. But let's just talk to the Lord right now. Give me your hand if you would, and we'll just pray. Lord, I thank you for the challenge that you've given us to be able to come closer and closer to you. Help us to hear this call to be silent, to let go of all of the things that are perhaps pulling us away from you, to surrender to you, and to let go and embrace our weakness and our failings. And may we always find you in our weakness with strength. And may Jesus' love for you always make you smile.